The curtains shook violently again. Shadows moved by one after another, and the voice of ghosts screamed around me. There was a sound of woman screaming from inside my body, calling my name in a terrifying voice, and absolute darkness surrounded me. I was lost in these thoughts when my mother's voice brought me back. Alina, Alina. I saw my mother's sad and hopeless face. I didn't know how long I had been suffering, but it all started with that curse doll. The one Sarah and I found in the wooden house at the end of my grandfather's garden. Sarah and I always loved adventures and discovering new things. That day we went to see what was in that strange house at the end of the garden, but I wish we hadn't. On that fateful day, we entered the Eerie house to see what was hidden inside. We were searching when Sarah screamed in pain, "Oh, my foot," and fell to the ground. I quickly ran to help her and saw a tiny needle stuck in her foot. We removed the needle, but it was very strange, because no one had ever come to this forbidden house until today when we came. So where did this needle come from? So we started to search and found a small doll in a cupboard. Its face covered with the small and large needles. In its head, right in the middle of forehead, was a needle as thick as large nail. The moment I saw it, I broke out in the cold sweat. I didn't know why, but I felt an eerie fear. Sarah, carefree as always, picked up the doll and said, "Who would you do this to such a pretty doll?" I said, "Sarah, don't touch it. It might be dangerous." But Sarah ignored me and first pulled a large needle from the doll's forehead, then started removing the other's needle. I didn't know why, but when Sarah pulled out the large needle, I felt a strange force, like an electric current passed through my body. I felt weak and lost my balance, so I sat down and said, "Sarah, I don't feel good. Please let's go." But Sarah, cheerful and carefree, kept going. Suddenly she turned to me with anxious eyes and said, "Did you see that woman behind the window?" I replied, "Which woman, Sarah? There's nothing there." I said, "Sarah, let's go. I'm scared." I tried to open the door, but it was locked. No matter how hard I pushed, it wouldn't open. I shouted, "Sarah, the door is locked." Suddenly I saw someone dragging Sarah. A tall, black-clad woman was pulling Sarah by the leg, dragging her across the floor. I was frozen with fear. I never forget the terrified look on Sarah's face as she screamed, "Help! Alina, help!" I ran towards her to help her, but suddenly I was alone in the room, and Sarah was gone. I remembered the cross round my neck. I grabbed it tightly, pressed it hard, and called out to God for help. At that moment, I felt shadows surrounding the room and attacking me. I don't know what to do, but that place was filled with darkness and coldness. Fear and anxiety overwhelmed me and I passed out. When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital. It was a long way from the village to the hospital. I was confused. What had happened? I tried to lift my head, but I couldn't. My head, face, hands, and one leg were burning intensely. It took a few minutes to remember what had happened to Sarah and me. Suddenly I started screaming. A doctor and my mother entered the room. My mother's face was red from crying. When she saw I was awake, she ran to me and screamed, "Alina, are you okay, dear?" She fell to the ground and crying and looking at me with joy. But I was still in shock. I asked, "Mom, what happened? Why am I here?" My mom said, "It's nothing, dear. Just being okay is enough. Don't think about anything. You're out of danger." For a moment, I felt my head, hands, and legs were bound. My hands were burning and aching. I touched my head. It was bandaged. I asked, "What happened, Mom? What happened?" I looked at them with fear, but my eyes were blurry. What happened, Mom? The doctor sat beside me, gently took my hands and said, Dear, don't you remember? You and your cousin were trapped in a fire for 2 days. Don't you remember anything? I shouted, What fire? My mom said, Calm down, dear, it's okay. Thank God you're still alive. Suddenly I remember Sarah. I asked Sarah, Where's Sarah? We were together, is she okay? Tears streamed down my mother's face. She just stared at me, as she had nothing to say. I shouted, What happened? Where's Sarah? My mother cried and whimpered, Sarah is dead. This news hit me so hard that I fainted again. When I woke up, it felt like I was a piece of ice without a soul. Half of my body was completely burned and I didn't feel good. So I fell into a severe depression. Discharged and returned home, my nightmares began. Every night I dreamed of Sarah looking at me with a strange and terrifying face. I would wake up in terror, unable to sleep peacefully. Worse, most nights when I fall asleep, my room turned into a cold and scary place. My eyes would open as wide as possible, feeling as if blood was dripping from them. My voice would get stuck in my throat, and I couldn't move. The room would be filled with horrifying and large shadows, and I would see that black-clad woman with a scary face and red eyes trying to come closer to me. The fear would penetrate me so deeply that I would wet myself out of terror. When my family reached me, they claimed to find me breaking things or standing in front of the mirror and laughing. It was strange because I remembered nothing. I felt normal in the morning, but as dusk approached, my condition worsened. One day my mother, crying and lamenting, said, Sarah, why did you want to hurt yourself last night? I stared at her in surprise and said, Mom, how was I supposed to do that? She said, last night when you were about to jump off the balcony, I saw you and grabbed you. It was interesting because precisely last night, in a state of half asleep and half awake, I saw Julia, my 10-year-old sister, had fallen into the garden pool and I wanted to jump in to save her. Unconsciously I said, I want to save Julia. My mother said, like the other night when you were hurting Julia and saying that woman wants to kidnap Julia. I remember it exactly a few nights ago. That black-clad woman attacked Julia's room and tried to take her away. Out of love and affection, I went to save Julia and pull her arms and legs to prevent the woman from taking her. My head started spinning. Oh my God, what is happening to me? There wasn't a psychologist my parents hadn't taken me to. So why wasn't I getting better? Poor Julia, who would run away and be terribly scared when she saw me. I had made up my mind. I took my mother's hand in mine and pressed them, saying that day when Sarah and I were in the house, we saw a doll with its face full of needles. Didn't you see it? My mother's face turned to fear and anger and she said, That doll was cursed. This is a forbidden place. What did you do with it? I told her the whole story. My mother started crying and shouting in fear. So that's the reason for all these bad events, that cursed doll? Without hesitation, she took my hands and led me to a place at the end of the village. There was a mud brick house. My mother started banging on the door. An old man with white hair and a calm and simple face opened the door. My mother fell to her knees and begged, Please help me. Please save my daughter. I know you haven't done this work for a year, but my daughter is in big trouble. The old man, without paying attention to my mother, stared into my eyes that felt fear, stress and anger, and I didn't know what this feeling was or where it came from. The old man took my mother's hand and said, Get up, woman. There is no need for all this pleading. No one but me can handle your daughter's situation. Come inside. As soon as I stepped inside, I felt ill. My hair started spinning. The terrifying and angry face of that black-clad woman appeared before me, as if she was shouting not to enter. For a moment, everything went dark, and I was back in our house. The terrifying woman was standing right before Julia, warning me. I saw Julia's face, screaming, Elena, Elena, come back. I tried to attack black-clad woman to grab her, but I couldn't. She was too strong. I did everything to pull her away from the Julia, but I failed. I wanted to throw something at her. Suddenly I felt falling from the high place, and I opened my eyes. I was back in that old man's house, lying on the ground with that old man chanting over me. My mother's face and hands were bruised. I asked, what happened? The old man took my hands and said, don't worry, my daughter. When you were possessed by that evil spirit, you did this to your mother. But it's over now. With God's help, the evil gone forever. But you must always wear this necklace around your neck and never take it off. And never distance yourself from it. It's better for you to get some sleep now. For the first time in a long time, I had a dream without fear, without nightmares, and without any strange feeling. When I opened my eyes, I was still inside the old man's house. I felt so much better and had a good feeling, as if I had returned from another world. The old man was a simple, powerful, and a kind man. I was so fond of him that I usually visited him every weekend. I always asked him about the story of the doll, but he always avoided giving an answer. After a year of going back and forth to the old man's house, he finally said, Elena, your cousin was a girl with a bright future, but her enemies made her life miserable. That doll was for Sarah's illness and pain, but she wanted to find the doll and break the spell of those misfortunes. You were lucky to be protected. I asked him what he meant by being protected, and he just laughed and said nothing, looking at me with a beautiful gaze and said, never ask or want to know how or in what way, because no one knows except me. Today marks the 10 years since the old man passed away, but I never forget those eyes, that gaze, and those unfinished words of the old man. And sometimes he still comes to me in my dreams and smiles at me.